Now let me now know my end now. I do not mean the end of which you just spoke. I mean a temporary end. I want to be successful, a man will say. Or the girl will say, well, I want to be happily married, and I want him to be successful, and I want to live graciously in my world. Well, that's an end. Go to the end. View the world from that end. Don't think of it. If you think of it, you're not in it. I must actually occupy the end. Go to the end and view the world from that end. Now act in it. How would it be if it were true? What would the feeling be like if it were true? For this is simply taking the end and drenching it in feeling. I assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and I drench myself with that feeling. Then I open my eyes, and the world denies it. It doesn't really matter. Let me remain faithful to that end, and then it will come just as suddenly. But strangely enough, I'm going to pass through, it may be not of severe tribulation, but I'll pass through certain trials, certain heartbreaks, certain delays that I can't quite understand. But these, when I reach the end, and the end comes suddenly upon me, and the whole thing is fulfilled, I will see it was all in order. Everything was in order. My own disappointments in my world led up to whatever I am doing today. When the teacher in my school, I could ill afford the $500 that my father gave me to go to this small school in New York City. And she made me the goat. She called me out before an audience of about 40 students, and she said, now listen to him speak. He will never earn a living using his voice. She should not have done that, but she did it. But she didn't know the kind of person that she was talking about. Instead of going down into the grave and burying my head in shame, I was determined that I would actually disprove her. It did something to me when she said to me, you will never earn, to the class, using me as the guinea pig to show them what not to do. And so she said I spoke with a guttural voice, and I spoke with this very heavy accent, and I will never use my voice to earn a living. Well, I do not know what the others are doing. I haven't heard of them. And there's not a thing wrong in selling shirts for Macy's. Use your voice there too. And I dare say most of them wound up selling groceries or something. I met one of them, and he was selling groceries at Macy's. And he said to me, Neville, what do you do? So I said, I talk on the Bible. You talk on the Bible? Are you a minister? I said, no, not a minister, but I simply talk on the Bible, from having experienced the Bible. Well, I do not know what they do, if they're still in this world, but I don't think one of them ever earned a living using his voice, unless he was selling groceries, as this one chap I know, he sold groceries. We all went to this school, and this teacher simply singled me out to make some little, exhibition of what I should not be doing in class. But I went home, and I was so annoyed that I had lost my father's $500 or $600 that he gave me for the 6 months course, that I was determined that she was false, that she was wrong. So I went to the end. I went to the end and actually felt that I was facing an audience, and unembarrassed, and I could talk and talk and talk forever without notes. No notes. And so the class came to an end, and I left. She was convinced, and maybe they were convinced. It doesn't matter what they do, it's what I do. So others may be convinced, it doesn't really matter. The whole vast world is yourself pushed out. Maybe I needed that jolt at that moment in time. And so I went through the different tribulations, and finally I found myself doing what I always wanted to do, to tell the story as it happened to me in my vision. I was having all these visions, and they were related, and yet how to do it. So the first night I started, I think 6 people came. I paid $3 for the hall, and they all came. I sat down. I wore a tux for the occasion. And I sat down and spoke for 10 minutes and dried up. Then I asked them to ask me questions. So they did, very graciously. They were all friends. Sent out 50 penny postcards. In those days, you could send a card for a penny. Sent out 50 and 6 came. And out of, well, sympathy, each gave a dollar bill. So at least I paid $3 for the room, and I made $3. And that was my beginning. And then it grew from 3 to 10 to 20. And one night, when I had about 50, a man in the building saw me growing and growing and growing, and he thought he'd put a stop to it. And he was going to one of these New Thought conventions in Washington, D.C. And so he asked me to take his platform. And he had a very large audience of about 500. He thought that would throw me. And so I accepted his generous offer. I learned afterward his purpose was to simply get me out of the place. He thought I would simply make a monkey of myself before a vast audience who were trained differently. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for me, the next time I spoke, my room couldn't take them. I had to move several times in 6 months, and then I moved to an old church that sat 1,100. So you see, he thought he was going to hurt me. As Scripture teaches, you meant it evil. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. So I got his audience. And then, about 3 years later, for some little infraction of the laws of New York City, they put him away for a couple of years. And when he came out, he asked me if I'd speak for him, and I said yes, without one penny. I will willingly speak for you, because no one else would speak for him. They cut him off completely and said, no, you don't realize how good you were to me. And so I will speak for you. And I went up and I spoke for him without taking one penny. And then he couldn't get going again. And then he and his secretary got into his car, turned on the ignition, closed up all things, and called it a day. So you see, you go through these things, and at moments they seem to be against you, and they're all for you, if you remain faithful to the end. So let us be imitators of God as dear children. So then we are told, I was not ungrateful. I was not, I would say, forgetful of the divine image. I remain faithful to it. If I remain faithful to it, let anything happen, and then say within yourself, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good.